All right, so let me tell you, this is a perfect program. It's working great. Everything is running. I could say to you, is there something wrong with it? But there is nothing wrong with it. It's working great. I want to mention one thing to you about this program. The fact that I have two standalone if statements, if F, if C. What my program will literally do is it evaluates every single one of the conditions on the standalone if statements. So the prior one where we were talking about you're too old to drive, you're too young to drive, get your learner's permit. Every one of those if standalone if statements, it evaluates the condition. Well, what happens if I have 15 standalone if statements and only one of them is good? Only one of them will execute. The problem that I have is that it slows down the run of my program, the fact that it has to evaluate every single one of the if statements. It slows down my program if in reality only one of them, one of the 6, one of the 3, one of the 2 for that matter, there's 2 of them, only one of the 2 of them could possibly be required to execute. But the fact that it has to evaluate both of them just took up processing time, and it slows up the run of my program. Increases the amount of response time, slows it up, and we're all about user experience, right? And so instead of having standalone if statements, if I could somehow connect these two together so it would only run one of the 2. And if it ran the first one, it just ignores the second one. That would be really helpful. And so the next thing that we're going to be talking about is how can I connect them together? And we're going to do that through an else. I'm going to add an else, if, else. And so it's the same if statement, if condition colon and tab and do stuff, else tab. The else will run when the if does not. So if the if runs, the else is ignored. But if the if doesn't run, it automatically by default will run the else. Now I don't know if that would work on my temperature conversion because what if they keyed in a Z? I don't want it to run the second half just because they keyed in a Z. But this allows me to connect if statements together. It is a default else. Notice there is no condition on the else. The else will automatically run when the if does not. So if class time is greater than or equal to 8, print got to get to class, else print what were they thinking? Really? 7:30 a.m. classes, really? So let's try this out. Let's try out an if else. And we're going to try if else. I like to call it 2 buckets. I have 2 separate independent, or I shouldn't say independent, 2 dependent buckets. It'll either drop in the first bucket or the second one, but it will drop into one. So let's talk about hummingbirds. So I'm going to ask the user for the name of their hummingbird. I'm not going to force it to a number. Input. I'm going to ask them for the name of their hummingbird. This next part is an ode to my father. He loved hummingbirds, and he had little hummingbird feeders all out in his backyard, and he would sit inside looking at it, and he would just laugh. He loved his little hummingbirds. And when he passed, I put hummingbirds on his, okay, not live hummingbirds, fake little hummingbirds on his wreath, because he loved hummingbirds. So this is an ode to my father. So if the hummingbird's name is Speedy, I'm going to say that's not very original. So I'm going to have an if statement. If name is equal to Speedy, and I'll capitalize the S in Speedy, I'm going to print something like, that's not very original. That's just a standalone if statement, right? Standalone. If I run it, it should ask me the name of your hummingbird, and if I say it's capital Speedy, that would have to be a capital Speedy, it's going to print that's not very original. So now I'm going to ask him, how fast do your hummingbirds, how fast do Speedy's wings beat? That is the name of your hummingbird. I'm not going to type in the word Speedy. I'm going to ask them whatever they've keyed into me. So we're going to try if else. We're going to try an if else. So I'm going to say, nope, I need something like, I'm going to call this variable speed. Speed equals, I need this to be a number. So I'm going to force it to an integer. And inside of here, I'm going to say input. Now what I say is, how fast do Speedy's wings beat? I'm even going to put it in a comment. How fast do Speedy's wings beat? And it's a question mark. This is what I'm trying to get inside of my input statement. Well, the problem is Speedy is a variable. That's contained in a variable. And then I have apostrophe S. And I want them flush next to one another, not a comma separating it, kind of like the dollar sign in front of my money value, which means that I'm probably going to be able to build what we have been calling a print statement, building it with comma separated or, concatenated after. I probably can do that inside of here. Now, the fact that apostrophe on Speedy's, apostrophe is a single quote. That's what an apostrophe is a single quote. That means that I'm going to have to surround the entire thing with double quotes, which is what I've been doing anyway. But I just wanted to point it out because some of you might be using single quotes here. So I'm going to use the double quotes. And I'm going to say how, capital, how fast do, and then I'm going to concatenate that with name. I'm going to concatenate that with my second text field that says apostrophe S space wings beat, question mark, beat. I'm going to run it and see what it looks like. How fast do Speedy's wings beat? I'm going to put Speedy in here just because, oops, not D Speedy, but Speedy. How fast do Speedy's wings beat? Put in a number. Let me run it again and say George, because that's a good hummingbird name as well. How fast do George's wings beat? The fact that I'm concatenating them together is going to mash stuff together, which means that I have to force the space after the word do. Otherwise, it would mash the word do right up next to Speedy's name. And because I'm concatenating them together, I'm going to just force the space in there. All right, so I can actually build these statements inside of my input because I really would like to mirror back to the user whatever their hummingbird's name is. All right, so then I'm going to say if speed is greater than 50 and simultaneously speed is less than 200, I'm going to print something like Speedy is within the average speed of a Hummer. So their wings beat at 200 beats per second. And so if your hummingbird's speed is between 50 and 200, that is the average speed that a hummingbird's wings beat at. But we said that we wanted the else. And so I'm going to come down here. I need to flush the else back, flush left. I'm going to type in else. It does not have a condition, but it does have that full colon. When I press enter, it's going to automatically tab in for me. I'm going to print something like Speedy must be flying with the wind. So I have two buckets. It either drops into the first bucket or not. If it doesn't drop into the first bucket, it automatically runs the second one. Luke has already picked up a problem, but we will address that at a later point in time. For now, I have two buckets. One of the two will execute. So let me run it. Enter the name of your hummingbird, George. How fast do George's wings beat? I look at my print statement, looks pretty good. Let's put him in 100. And it should say George is within the average speed of a hummingbird. If I run it again and his name is Sammy, how fast do Sammy's wings beat? If it's more than 200, like 201, it should tell me Sammy must be flying with the wind. Now the problem most definitely is less than 50, but how many test cases, just for this right here, how many test cases do you think to thoroughly test my code? Because if I want you to map out a plan to create your code, I also want you to map out a plan to test your code. Don't just randomly, willy-nilly put in something, oh, it worked. You need to thoroughly test your code, just like you map out a plan to create it, map out a plan to test it. What test cases do you think that I would need just to test this structure right there? Tell me some of them. And don't just throw out numbers. Tell me why you chose that number. So let's hear some numbers. -10, and what am I testing? The fact that it is outside of this boundary, because this is testing between 50 and 200. So -10 would be invalid. It would make my if statement invalid. That would test the else. Excellent. What other number should I test? Excellent. Something between 50 and 200. Something that makes this condition true. Something between 50, 100. That would work. Because now I'm testing that the condition works. Yes, sir. Excellent. I should test 50 and 200. They're boundary values. I should test 50 and 200. So now I have a -10. I have 100, or I have 50 and 200. There's one more test case that I should run. Something greater than 200. So I tested below the boundary, and I tested above the boundary, and I tested within, and I tested each of the boundary values. That's 5 test cases to thoroughly just to make sure that runs. 5 test cases. Otherwise, you're just arbitrarily, oh, I'm just going to put a number. Oh, it worked. Life goes on and you move on. That's how I get programs where I say write a program that calculates your age in dog years. And I say my age is 10 and my age in dog years ends up being 13.75. Yeah, gave me a number, but not the right number because you didn't thoroughly test your code. We've talked enough about dog years. It's about time that you had a chance to do it. I want you to submit dog years